and welcome to Writer, a show by and for writers and those who read them. My name is Dennis Shaw, and today I'll be talking to Tim O'Brien, the novelist. We're going to talk a little bit about technique in writing, especially in writing fiction, and we'll talk a little bit about subject matter and about what makes a good story. Hi, Tim, and welcome.
Good to be here.
A lot of the people who will be viewing this program are writing themselves at various levels of competency. I thought perhaps we could tell them some of the tricks of the trade that you've picked up in your career.
Well, I don't have any real tricks. I'd say if I were to give advice to someone who's trying to write a novel or a story, I'm a novelist, it would be primarily tenacity and to stick with it. I tend to, for the last 25 years of my writing career, I get up around 6 in the morning and I'm at work every day by 7 and work all day long until 6 o'clock at night, weekends and my birthday and Christmas and Halloween, other people's birthdays. I mean, I really put the hours in. I do take a break for about 2 hours in the afternoon to, work out. But aside from that, it's just putting my nose right to the typewriter and keeping it there. And I think, a lot of people who want to write or dabble at writing aren't willing to pay the dues of time and of energy. That there are a lot of people, I suppose, who have the skill to write, and certainly almost everyone has a story to tell. But I think like anything that's worth doing, you have to really slave at it, pausing over every word. Is that the right word? Is this the right tempo to the story? Is the story moving fast enough? And to do it well, you can't just be a dilettante. You really have to work hard at it the way you would at any other job. I think that writers have the reputation of being kind of playing all the time, going to parties, and it's not that way at all. It's really a lot of work.
But the routine is unnecessary, just to get in the harness and do it.
I think so.
The practice.
I think one element of it is, especially if you're a novelist, as I am, is that a story is a little bit like a dream. And if you wake up from a dream, it's hard to get back into it. You can't just fall asleep again. And so you have to be kind of regular. Every day going to the typewriter, staying with it to keep the story alive inside you. If you leave it for even, in my case, for even a day or two, it's very hard for me to remember what it was I was trying to do in that scene I'm working on so hard.
How do you start off? Do you have warm-up exercises, or do you edit the stuff you wrote the day before, or some particular way you jump into? Because I'm a novelist, I have one story that goes over the course of, say, 4 years. And I know pretty much where I am in the story. But when I come to the typewriter early in the morning, I'll almost always go back to the page I've done the day before and read it over and make corrections as a way of kind of easing myself into the scene that I'm trying to finish. Do you do a lot of outlining of characters?
None.
None.
No, if I were to outline a plot or do a character profile, it would take away from the suspense and the mystery and the thrill of what's going to happen next. The same way if you knew before reading a book what's going to happen next, I wouldn't want to read it because I know what's going to happen next. And I feel the same way as a writer. I don't want to know even what the next paragraph will be. Certainly not the next chapter, and certainly not the end of the story. I want to be surprised myself as I'm writing.
What makes a good day's work? Is it number of words or number of hours at the task?
Well, it's hard to say. A good day's work can sometimes just be a sentence. It really can be. And thank God that sentence is over, and I like it. Other times it can be a couple of pages, 2 or 3 pages for me. Very rarely more than that. Hardly ever anymore. When I was a young man, beginning, in my 20s, I could knock off 10 pages like lightning. They were no good. I thought they were good, but they weren't. But now, I suppose like any job, you recognize a job ill done, that you really haven't done very well. You're quicker to recognize your own errors. And so I'm a bit more cautious now in calling a page or a paragraph finished.
A lot of young writers are advised to write through and not stop to edit. and get the piece done. Of course, with a novel, that would be different. Do you work chapter by chapter, or you take more time to edit as you go along?
I do both. I mean, I work chapter to chapter. I start at the beginning of the story and go to the end over the course of, say, 4 or 5 years. But I do edit myself, you know, as I say, every line and often every word. There's a difficulty that I found that comes with this, though, is that because I slave so hard on every sentence, trying to make it just perfect, and the next one just right, that you get a whole bunch of kind of perfect sentences, but you lose sight of the whole. You know, that when you write things quickly, you sort of have it all in front of you. But if you do the work the way I do, like building each sentence, you can sometimes have a page and a half full of wonderful sentences, but the whole thing is no good.
Doesn't add up.
You know, that doesn't move along quickly, or the character's dialogue doesn't really do what it is you wanted the scene to do. It's good dialogue, but it doesn't have much to do with the story that you're trying to tell. So there are drawbacks to any technique, I think, but for me, over the years, I found that paying attention to the sentences and the words is ultimately what makes a good novel, as opposed to just a mediocre or a bad novel.
Do you have a best reader? Is there someone whose reading or feedback of your work you like that you go to?
Whoever my current girlfriend is. They sort of change by the week. That's not true really anymore, but it was at one point that I don't have one reader, no. I used to back when, again, when I was a young man. I had a good buddy who, for my first 3 books, was essentially my editor. I had no in-house editing at a publishing house. His name was Eric Hansen. He teaches high school in New Hampshire, English. And Eric and I worked very well through my 3rd book, going after Cacciato. But he sort of went his way after that, and I went my own way. And since then, I've been on my own. So I guess the answer to your question is now I think I'm pretty much my own editor. That's not to say that when I turn a book in that there's not, you know, things that have to be done, but
younger writers I've worked with show their stuff too soon, or they show it to the wrong people, or they don't specify what they want, except tell me if you like it, or tell me if this works. So it's really helpful, excuse me, if you could find someone and tell them specifically what to react to.
I think when I turn a book into my editor, I have my own doubts in places. That does this scene really belong here? Or does even all this material belong in the book? Would it be better without it? I think every writer, if he's a good writer, knows where things are suspect, where there's doubt. Maybe the scene belongs there, maybe it doesn't. And so I prepare a list of questions, not on paper, but in my head, that when I turn a book in, I'll say, take a look at that. And is the ending strong enough? Is it funny enough? I like to, even when I'm writing, for example, about war, the Vietnam War, which has been one of my main subjects, I try to have, you know, elements of comedy, so it's not just relentlessly, you know, tragic, or relentlessly somber. And if the comedy or the humor is not working, I want to know about it. You know, there's nothing worse than something that's supposed to be funny and is not.
It doesn't work. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the war. We were saying earlier that now there are people retiring from the military who have spent their entire career in the all-volunteer force, and were not in Vietnam because they were too young for our war. And I wonder if that has how that affects readership, or if it has any impact, or if a good story just carries on.
I think a good story carries on. That I certainly don't think of myself as a Vietnam writer, even though I do often write about Vietnam, any more than Toni Morrison thinks of herself as a black writer. I mean, she's a writer who writes about, you know, black people. Joseph Conrad is a good example of a man who was a very, very great writer about writes stories that take place on the sea. But he used to complain in his letters to his friends, I'm not a sea writer. I don't write about algae and porpoises and salt water. I write about human beings. And the stories are set on the ocean, and oftentimes, not always, but often. But they're really ultimately about the human heart. And I feel the same about my own work, that I think I'm a writer about, you know, the stresses that are placed on the heart by all kinds of forces. fathers and mothers and hometowns and America itself that sent me off to that war. And I feel I'm writing really about this country and about the human heart in general, much more than about Vietnam itself. That Vietnam kind of bores me in a way. You know, I'm not big on bombs and bullets and military maneuvers, but I am big on what happens to the heart when it's under incredible stress. Not just the stress of death, but the stress of expectations from people in your hometown and girlfriends and parents and things like that.
My experience is that the good story carries over. About 10 years ago, I taught going after Caucasia in a night class at a university. And there's a wide variety of people of ages and backgrounds. None of them had a contact with the war. They had no relatives who had served.
Really?
But they all were impressed by the story.
Good.
And war that I tried to tell them about then began to make sense.
Good.
Because the power of the story in that book carries over the
That's
details
good.
of autobiography or the details of background.
I think it has to. I mean, a good story, no matter what it's about, has to transcend its time and its place. I mean, Madame Bovary, you know, if it were just about that time and that place, wouldn't last. I mean, or nor would Hamlet or anything else. A thing has to, a piece of art, to be successful, has to succeed 10,000 years from now, or 500 years from now. If it's hooked to the contemporaneous, you know, just to Vietnam, you and I, who were both in Vietnam, we're going to die. A whole generation's going to die. And, you know, 100 years from now, Vietnam will be a little footnote. And 500 years from now, it certainly will be a footnote. And so a story has to not depend on the here and now. The story instead depends on the everlasting.
One of the things that that succeeds, I think, in the Vietnam novels is that you have not tried to tell the story in linear time. That Vietnam cannot be explained with a starting point, a twist. A lot of storytelling is like a piece of string. You have an end that begins, and then you weave the string in loops, and then you come to the other end. But the Vietnam experience can't be told that way.
I don't think so. Not successfully. One of the reasons is that the war itself did not have a linear feel to it, beginning, middle, end. The war itself, even for those who've experienced it here in America, had kind of a circular feel to it, just going around in circles, which is what my own experience in Vietnam was, kind of walking in circles. We'd walk from one village to the next, and back to the first. There was no front and there was no rear. There was no up, no down, no right, no wrong. It was all ambiguous, a big muddle, unlike World War II or World War I, where there was a sense of marching from Normandy to Berlin, in one direction, or from, you know, Midway to Tokyo, going for Japan. But Vietnam was just, you're going in circles all the time, and I mean it not just in the physical sense, but ultimately in the moral sense. You know, it was a war of incredible moral ambiguity, to say the least. And I think that a novel or a story, to capture that, can't be structured in an old-fashioned beginning, middle, end sort of way. It'd be kind of boring, for one thing, to read, but it'd be even more boring, and I think untruthful to write.
Let's talk a little bit about the moral ambiguity. Does the writer have an obligation to be, quote, moral?
In a sense, yes, and I don't mean in the proselytizing, you know, pulpit-thumping kind of way. But I think any writer, no matter what your subject, if you're writing a love story or a ghost story, if you're a serious writer, you're interested in you're interested in morality. You don't preach to people saying, you know, this is the right thing and this is wrong. But you do, you know, try to get your computer or your typewriter to somehow use as a weapon to explore these things. I often think of writing as an exercise in search as opposed to discovery. That I never discover any great truths about the world. And I don't know how many of us do, but what's interesting about writing is the search for the truths and the paths we take. A man falls in love with a woman and he wants to know more about her. And so he, you know, asks her out on a date, and they ask each other questions, and this leads to that, and through a whole lifetime, let's say they get married, there's still a search going on, because all of us are ultimately encased in these leaden skulls of ours. I can't enter your mind, and you can't enter mine. Literally, we're always sort of separate from each other. And a novel tries to replicate that sense of searching for something. Who are you, and what is this world we live in?
In The Lake of the Woods, you talk in several places about that otherness of two people trying to understand one another, or people in America trying to understand Miley 4.
Yeah.
A clear-cut example of no moral ambiguity, a bad act.
Yeah.
And now 30 years later, it's not quite as clear-cut.
Yeah, I just went the massacre at My Lai. A lot of Americans don't even know about it or forgotten it, especially the younger generation. But on this day in March in 1968, almost exactly 30 years ago, a company of 105 American soldiers were helicoptered into a little village where I happened to be a year later, stationed. That was my area of operations. And in the course of the next 4 hours, these 105 guys killed anywhere, it's all estimates, but anywhere from 300 and something to 530 babies and old women, old men, housewives. Just there were no enemy soldiers there that day, but they killed them anyway, and they did it systematically over the course of 4 hours. This is the subject of one of the novels that I've, as you know, in The Lake of the Woods. Not the killing itself isn't the subject, but the aftermath. What happens to one of these people? How do you live with something like that? What do you tell your friends when you come home? What do you tell your wife when you get married? What do you tell yourself late at night when you're trying to go to sleep?
And can you really erase it as successfully as the character tried to erase his record in the company?
I think that's probably what I would have tried to do, is try to erase it the way we try to erase all the bad things we do in our lives.
In the novel, the main character goes into the headquarters company and literally goes into the logs and the rosters and deletes his presence.
Yeah,
deletes his
literally deletes his presence.
It's not that easy.
Not that easy. And you're right, he does it literally. He just erases his name from the roster of the company. But he goes farther than that, or further than that. When he comes home, he lies to everybody about what he did, and he gets married and lives with this woman for years and doesn't whisper a word of it. And I think that I have two feelings about that. One feeling is that sounds normal. I mean, what else do you do except try to erase it? But the other seems utterly abnormal. Sort of looking the other way from your own ill deeds, your own evil. And I think all of us in our lives have been trapped in situations like that, where we know we've done something wrong. We try to hide it not only from the world, we try to hide it from ourselves.
It's almost a cliche in recovery programs that people are sick as their secrets. And what you were talking about before in that search, a lot of times has to be more inward than looking outward. I
think ultimately novels are inward searches. I mean, they have external components, the storyline that every reader follows. Is this guy going to tell his wife, and when she finds out, what is she going to do? Is she going to divorce him, or not for the thing itself, but for the 30 years of betrayal, of lying to her about his whole life was a lie? How is she going to respond? So there's a surface part of the story, but to me the most interesting part, finally, with a novel is the search that goes inside the character as he tries to discover who he is, and as the reader tries to discover more about who he is. Even though we never really get to a central you, we get closer and closer.
Because there are layers of truth. There's the factual truth, and the emotional truth, and the moral truth, and sometimes an allegorical truth.
Yeah. Yeah, we tend to, that's one of my favorite themes, in fact, is so what's true and what's not. I mean, for example, we could say, it's true that we're, let's say, in Tokyo, and the date is October 1st, 1942. Well, that's true, but it's not true if, in San Francisco, where the time is 8 hours earlier. The truth is a relative thing. And that even, this is one of Einstein's big arguments, is, what relativity is all about. And the thing about our nation, I think, is we tend to look at truth as a very fixed and certain sort of thing, kind of very, very commonsensical nation. That's just the way it is. It was a good war, or he's a good man. But things are almost always more complicated than that. You know, good men, even the best of them, sometimes do bad things. Mm-hmm. They're not all good, and it's not an all-good nation.
But in the culture, a baseball game is 9 innings, and a TV show runs for 52 minutes, and there is closure at the end of it.
Yeah, there is a kind of closure, just as there is in life, but the closure always leads to the next baseball game. You know, the Yankees might have beaten the Red Sox yesterday, but not tomorrow.
Not today.
Right.
Yeah. One of the nice things I enjoyed about Little Lake of the Woods is that the ending is ambiguous, and people have argued about and justified either conclusion.
It's very ambiguous. It's a mystery story. And this woman, what happens essentially in the novel, for those who haven't read it, is the woman, in the beginning of the novel, finds out this terrible thing about her husband, other things too she finds out. All in just, the world just comes crashing down on her. She just vanishes, just gone. And he wakes up one morning and she's gone without a message, without a single clue. And I mean gone permanently. And throughout the rest of the novel, of course, he's looking for her. And the police begin looking for her, and everybody's looking for her. And most readers expect there to be a solution at the end. Here's what happened to her. Mm-hmm. But there is none. I mean, zero.
Did that seem risky to you when you were writing?
Yeah, but it also seemed necessary. That what I was interested in a way, is, in part, as a writer, is I wanted to write a real mystery. That is, a mystery that's solved isn't a mystery. Because it's solved. I mean, every Columbo show you watch, it's not a mystery, really, because it's a solved mystery. A real mystery is one that remains open. For example, if we knew for a fact that Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy and there were no other participants in the crime, it would just be a murder. It wouldn't have that compelling feel to it. I mean, that's why the movie JFK was made, you know, because it's sort of about, it's open-ended. I mean, you don't see movies being made about Harry Truman dying of old age, because he died of old age. Or Amelia Earhart stays alive in our memory because we don't know what happened to her. There were a lot of famous women, female aviators, but a lot of them, but they don't carry quite that sense of I don't know, fascination that Amelia does. And so I wanted to write a novel about what we don't know and the things that are never, because it is frustrating to a lot of readers, what happened to this woman. But you also are fascinated, and you sort of begin asking questions about what do I think happened to her. And I might add also that in life itself, what ultimately I think when I go to sleep at night, my mind often goes to the things that continue to puzzle me, and you know, what happened to him? I wonder where he is now. I wonder where she is now. Things I'll never know the answer to. I'll never know. And I wonder what my father was thinking before he died. You know, what were his last thoughts? And things you can never get answers to. And I think
back to that separation, that otherness.
Yeah, that sort of things we can never know.
But the novel is a way to connect.
And a novel is one way to explore this stuff. In a novel, you can kind of get in another head because you're making the character up yourself.
Just one or two things you've learned from just the act of doing the last novel, the latest novel.
Well, I guess the main thing I could say, Dennis, would be that a writer, unlike in other occupations, always is brand new every time. That there's a certain. I mean, if you're say a plumber, you go to fix that faucet. It's pretty much like that faucet, and it's also fixed. When you leave it, it stops dripping. You can physically see it stop dripping. But with a novel, you never know. Is it a good novel? Is people going to like it? There's a sense of subjectivity and a little terror that goes with writing, because every novel's new and every story's new. It's not like every other faucet. And so right now, you've caught me at a point of, I'm just finished this book. I'm a little relieved. I'm also a little apprehensive.
This is Dennis Shaw, and we're on Writer to Writer. Thank you for watching.